Hey guys, Thomas the Silly Jr. here, aka Mustached. I'm here with a little bit of a different video game review. As you'll probably soon see, Pokemon Sun and Moon will be finished, according to me. I will not be doing the extended missions as I did for Digimon World Dawn and Dusk. So this will be a comparison and contrast review of the two games Pokemon Sun and Moon and Digimon World Dawn. So, of course, I should let you all know that the bias here is that yes, I do tend to lean towards Digimon more than Pokemon, naturally. Which shouldn't surprise a lot of people based on the content. I've pushed Pokemon versus Digimon for quite a while. I've been wanting it for a decade. I've said this time and time again ever since Digimon World 4 is about the time I was like, yeah, I could see Digimon versus Pokemon as a crossover video game battle. And there have been a lot of games that have come out that have really, one game in particular, Pokken, that has intrigued my interest in this whole versus battle because that was made by Bandai Namco, which is usually the game company that usually puts out the Digimon games. The more you know, if you didn't know that before. So of course we have Pokemon Sun, which came out for the Nintendo 3DS, and we have Digimon World Dawn, which came out on just Nintendo DS. So I'll go from left to right, story to story, and then gameplay to gameplay to start this off. So let's start off with the story of Pokemon Sun. So we start off with Lily, or as I refer to her throughout the entire Let's Play as the plot device. We see her escaping some sort of base with a stolen Pokemon. From after her escape, we get a selection of a few skins that you can wear for your avatar as you select your Pokemon as well and head off into the world on this island, battling various wild Pokemon as well as various trainers to get more experience along the way. Now, in there, deeper into the story, you meet Team Skull, which you would think would be the opposing force to your story, but as it would turn out, Team Skull is not very good at what they do, and that of being bad, that meaning they're pretty very, what's the comparison I can make? I'm not really sure, but there's something brewing in my head right now of a comparison. I just can't remember their names from Power Rangers, the two Numbskull characters. But anyways, from that, it turns out way later on, I would say as we edge closer to the middle-ish section of the game, is when we're introduced to this Ether Paradise, or however it was pronounced, where Pokemon are apparently supposed to be treated, and as we eventually find out that this place was actually run by Lily's mom, who ends up being one of, if not the bigger actual antagonist of the entire game. And for that consequence of that, it does feel like the ending of this game, Pokemon Sun, was a little bit rushed in terms of pacing. And what I mean by that is that we kind of go through Team Skull for, like, again, up until that middle section, and then we're introduced to our antagonist, like, I would say close to halfway through the game. And it definitely also feels like the first, or either the first or second encounter, I forget which one is which at this point, of where when you face the mother in the Ether Paradise, it feels like that should have been the final encounter, based off of the level of urgency, or the level of escalation, as I like to put it myself, but that's more referring to gameplay. But in terms of like increasing the danger element, it does feel like that was closer to a, oh, this is the end of the video game kind of moment, only to proceed to only find out that there was so much more slogging around this game, and that kind of breeds into the gameplay as well. But the story does suffer because of it. It does feel like the story does drag, which is unfortunate. And of that, I would probably give the gameplay, or story, sorry, of Pokemon Sun either a 4 or 5 out of 10. I do feel like there was quite a bit of pacing issues as far as the slog to get to, who the actual villain is, and what they're actually doing, and what their reasoning is, and all of that stuff. And as we move on to that, I will skip on over to Digimon World Dawn and its story. So this story opens up with quite a big punch, as Yggdrasil, this sort of Doombringer type Digimon, has been known as throughout the lore of Digimon, I suppose, because there are other things in Digimon that also use Yggdrasil even outside of Digimon as well, as I have learned through some poking around. So, you're immediately learned to your immediate threat of Yggdrasil, and as the story progresses, it kind of goes through main mission, and then after you do a main mission, you'll be prompted to do a few, I would say 5 or 6 side missions, and then be prompted back into another main mission. This creates a sort of story that is, you think you go through this urgent moment, then you get a little moment of relaxation, and then you get right back into the heat of the moment as other various threats try to claim their entitlement to the digital world. And I do think in terms of pacing and storytelling, I do think that that is a better method of storytelling in general, is sort of giving the big story and then sort of waving it out, instead of having the actual story, like in Pokemon Sun, only start to really peak toward the end and then not make as much sense, unfortunately, for Pokemon Sun's case. But in Digimon World Dawn, it does feel like the story was indeed fleshed out. And to be fair, Digimon does have a tendency to tell better stories than Pokemon. That usually is the case, and I've even seen a lot of reasonable Pokemon fans come to that conclusion. Pokemon stories, I think with the exception of Mystery Dungeon, are usually just the same-ish kind of story. I could be wrong. I have not played as many Pokemon games as Digimon games, but from the vibe I've been seeing along the way, it does seem like the stories tend to follow a very same-ish beat, ? Again, I would leave that to a Pokemon fan to correct me if I am wrong on that. But other than that, it does feel like the story of Digimon World Dawn would keep a player invested in the story, kind of in a wave-like formation. You're kind of going back to the story throughout proper intervals throughout your gameplay. So I would give the story of Digimon World Dawn a much more solid 7 out of 10. It was a really enjoyable story. So now let's talk about gameplay for each. Now, of course, for Pokemon Sun, if you were watching my Let's Play, I'll leave the first part of each Let's Play in the description, by the way, you would notice that the game was running slow for Pokemon Sun. That was on me, by the way. not anything wrong with anything else. So I'm gonna put that aside, and I'm still gonna say I think even if that were the case again, I do think the pacing of the story does hinder the gameplay a little bit, as it does feel a little bit harder to invest in the actual gameplay. But for just keeping in terms of actual gameplay, it is a turn-based game with a lot of status effects, and there is a few mechanics, I would say, that were either really bothersome or slightly bothersome. One in particular that I felt was more bothersome was the ability for Pokemon that you're opposed to being able to call out for help, and then within the battle of the contents of actually battling said Pokemon who called for help, that Pokemon that was aided in would then call for help, and then it would happen again and again and again, until luck would have it that then whatever number of Pokemon that were aiding couldn't get any more aid. That definitely felt like a slog to get through. It happened, I want to say, 2 or 3 times in my Let's Play. This, of course, is a thing that seems to appear with wild Pokemon, not tamers with Pokemon. So that was an unfortunate circumstance of they just keep calling for aid, and it just slows down the combat. It doesn't make it as fluid as it could be. And you're still dealing with the back and forth system of your typical RPG, so that is the backside to that, is if you have to keep going and going and going, it just feels like those particular battles definitely drag on a lot longer than they need to. And the other slight hiccup was, I forget what part this happened in. It was in one of the trials where it was just like a pick up and find something or a set of things. Again, that particular part it didn't feel as intuitive, or didn't seem as clear, just to put it in a more simple term, as to what to actually do. And I did have to ask around a Pokemon forum of like, okay, what do I actually have to do here? And then that Pokemon forum on one of my Facebook groups aided me. This particular Facebook group was dedicated to Pokemon games, so I was able to get some pretty quick feedback there. So there were a few hiccups here and there, but I would say overall it's a pretty solid RPG. I would probably give it a 6 out of 10 in that regard, of just because of those minor hiccups that just slog combat a lot longer than it needs to go. Just a little cleanup on that side, I think, if you could cover that. And I'm not a big fan of also hiding missions, which is guilty in both of these games. And yeah, definitely a little bit of point knocked off for that as well in terms of both. So I would give it a 6 out of 10. So let's move over to Digimon World Dawn. So the combat is, again, turn-based, and it is, for the most part, pretty frequent and pretty quick as well. A lot of back and forth, etc., etc. But the combat being as moderate as it is in this game, the leveling up system is a lot easier to take in, so there is that to account for. And getting through the main story at the very least is relatively simple. You'll definitely feel like you're leveling up at a rate that feels very comfortable. The levels of escalation, which is when the game decides to rise in difficulty, definitely feels a lot better paced in this game. It feels like this is a lot better planned than Pokemon Sun's case, in terms of just, okay, well, this is the part where things are going to get a little bit tougher, and then a little bit tougher, and then a little bit tougher. There never felt like a point where it was like a complete spike, and that was actually present in Pokemon Sun as well. I didn't even mention that though. The what I would consider the proper final boss of that game, where I decided to finale that game, that boss was in the level of escalation on that boss alone was insanely high, and it didn't feel like that was really fair at all. It just felt like, oh, I'm just suddenly just completely outmatched, and that's the end of the game as well. So that was a very shocking little bump, if you will. And again, in Digimon World Dawn, it felt like the level of escalation was a lot better handled. And again, this game is also guilty of hiding some of its missions behind more obscure things, like, oh, you have to get a particular Digimon to do this quest, or something, 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 like along those lines. So I would have Digimon World Dawn in terms of score be a little bit closer to the 7 mark in terms of gameplay, with the caveat of it would have been a 6 if some of the other elements were just as rough as Pokemon Sun. So this is interesting. I actually went into this thinking that Pokemon Sun was going to be the better game. And again, I will say that, again, this is coming from someone who's a Digimon fan, but I actually was expecting Digimon Sun to be the better game of the two, and I was pleasantly surprised of what I got in Digimon World Dawn. A much more clear and better story. Well, that part isn't a surprise, but I was actually surprised by the gameplay and how it was handled and utilized, and how the levels of escalation were properly, or at least a lot more properly utilized in comparison to other RPG games. It definitely felt like there was no unnecessary spike at any given point, or any unearned spike. It didn't feel like that was ever the case, so that's actually a good thing. So yeah, I would say out of the two, I would have to give it to, I think Digimon World Dawn is the better game in terms of both story and gameplay. And at first, I was gonna I was assuming I was gonna give the story to Digimon in terms of story and the gameplay to Pokemon, but the issues I ran into Pokemon Sun were just a little bit, it edged it a bit down in terms of those inconsistencies, or not inconsistencies, but the little nuisances that kept popping up throughout, and the spike of the level of escalation that came at the end there definitely bumped Pokemon Sun below Digimon World Dawn in terms of actual gameplay. And that was my very first versus review for both Pokemon Sun and Digimon World Dawn. As stated previously, I would love to see these two, eventually Pokemon and Digimon, in a crossover fighting game. I've gotten to a point where I've been able to write out a solution to the obvious Digimon are stronger than Pokemon scenario that a lot of people, or I should say a few people, have actually said to me. I've already wrote out, you could just give Pokemon an extra evolution, at least the ones present in the game. If they were to make a game, the Pokemon you cast in that said game, just give them an extra evolution, and then that would even them out, essentially. It's a pretty easy solution, and I'm surprised that not a lot of people can think of that seems like an easy solution. But it's a solution I've given right here and right now. Who knows? There might be some more Pokemon versus Digimon shenanigans in the future, but for the time being, Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth Hacker's Memory is where I'm at in terms of the two. I might pick up another Pokemon game relatively soon. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. But we shall see. But until next time, if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are greatly appreciated, and until next time, everyone, bye-bye.